Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 13th of February. I'm Erin Viner, and this is IBA News broadcasting from Jerusalem. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has retraced his decision to remove several judges from the panels awarding the Israel Prize after Attorney General Yehuda Weinstein called on him to refrain from taking such steps during the election season. Netanyahu has been facing mushrooming condemnation over claims that he politicized the prestigious prize by removing judges over their political orientations. Acclaimed author David Grossman joined the increasing boycott of the award last night. Weinstein's message to the Prime Minister meant that he would not defend Netanyahu's decision to disqualify members of the judging panels if the issue was brought before the High Court of Justice. In a written response to Weinstein, legal advisor to the Prime Minister's office Shlomit Barnea Fargo said that Netanyahu will respect the Attorney General's directive, but added that if the Prime Minister is re-elected, he will establish an advisory committee to establish new criteria for the appointment of the Israel Prize judges. The Central Election Committee disqualified another candidate from running in the upcoming race, although by the narrowest of margins. Otzma Yehudit candidate Baruch Marzal was barred from the joint Yachad Ha'am Itanu list by just a 17-16 vote. Now the High Court will hear an appeal on that decision and make a final ruling. Past attempts to block Marzal have failed. The committee had decisively voted to block Balad MK, a member of Knesset Hanin Zoabi, with an overwhelming 27-6 vote earlier yesterday. Zoabi has openly supported the Hamas terror group that calls for the genocide of all Jews in its charter. Marzal's disqualification was based on several statements attributed to him claimed to be racist by left-wing groups who petitioned the move. It is anticipated that the High Court justices will adopt the position of Attorney General Weinstein, who opposed barring either Marzal or Zoabi. Nobel Peace Prize laureate and Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel has expressed his support for Prime Minister Netanyahu to address the U.S. Congress on March 3rd. 2 full-page ads will appear in tomorrow's New York Times and the Washington Post, publicizing Wiesel's statements that he plans to attend the speech about the catastrophic danger of a nuclear Iran. He also urges U.S. President Barack Obama and others to join him in hearing the case for keeping weapons from those who preach death to Israel and to America. Meanwhile, according to a recent public opinion poll published in the Huffington Post YouGov, the American public finds that while the Republican invitation to Netanyahu wasn't correct, a clear majority still believe that Obama should greet Netanyahu. 47% of respondents said that the request was inappropriate, while only 30% thought it was okay. 58% said that Obama should meet with the Israeli Prime Minister, while only 19% thought that he shouldn't. The United Nations Security Council has threatened to impose sanctions on any parties that purchase oil from the Islamic State or the al-Qaeda-linked Nusra Front, cautioning nations to stop making abduction ransom payments and also banned all trade in antiquities from war-torn Syria. The 15-nation council unanimously adopted the Russian-drafted resolution, which is legally binding and gives the UNSC the authority to enforce decisions with economic penalties. It does not, however, authorize the use of military force. U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Samantha Power, lamented that the Council has not been able to display the same kind of unity in attempts to bring an end to the 4-year civil war in Syria and blamed the conflict for the rise of the Islamic State.
There is no better recruiting tool for ISIL than the atrocities of the Assad regime, which has dropped barrel bombs on civilians, used chemical weapons on its own people, and tortured tens of thousands more in its prisons. We regret that we were not able to show the same unity we have shown today in passing the critically important resolution on ISIL when it came to the crimes of the Assad regime. So just as we condemn the monstrosities perpetrated by ISIL, we must also continue to condemn the brutality of the Assad regime, which has long since lost the legitimacy to lead, and reject the arguments of those who claim that we must partner with the regime to effectively confront violent extremists. As the war in Syria grinds on, we renew our call on the Council to press for the political solution needed to end the tremendous suffering of the Syrian people.
The Jerusalem family of Mohammed Musallam is expressing shock and denying claims that from the Islamic State that he is a spy for the Mossad. The radical organization announced that it is holding 19-year-old Israeli Arab captive, claiming that he posed as a foreign fighter to gather intelligence for Israel. The ISIS English language magazine Dabiq published an interview with Musallam in which he confessed to joining the Islamist insurgents in Syria so that he could report back to the Mossad about the location of its bases, size of its weapons stockpiles, and identity of Palestinian recruits. Musallam's father told reporters that his son disappeared after saying that he was going to participate in a local firefighters course, but later called to tell the family that he had been kidnapped by ISIS operatives in Turkey and taken to Syria against his will. According to an unnamed Israeli security official speaking to Reuters, Musallam went to Turkey on October 24th en route to fighting with the Islamic State on his own initiative. When asked if that statement constituted a denial that Musallam was an Israeli spy, the source agreed that, yes, it could be understood that way. Out of concern that members of the country's 20% Arab minority may be recruited to ISIS and return home radicalized, the government has recently stepped up monitoring and prosecution of would-be jihadis. In other news, the U.S. Senate has confirmed U.S. President Barack Obama's nominee to run the Pentagon and is handing Ashton Carter the unenviable task of steering the military as Secretary of Defense as the nation confronts the Islamic State and other worldwide threats. The vote was approved in the Republican-controlled Senate by a 93-5 majority. Carter will replace Chuck Hagel, the former Republican senator, who reportedly had a rough relationship with Obama's insular group of national security advisors. Carter is Obama's fourth defense secretary in 6 years, joining a line of succession that began with Robert Gates and Leon Panetta. One of his first tasks will be helping to win support for Obama's call to Congress for new authority to use force against the Islamic State. Many Republicans and Democrats are reacting negatively to the president's draft proposal, critical of what they say are its limitations and vagueness. In endorsing the 60-year-old Carter, Republicans expressed little hope that he would have better success in gelling with Obama's inner circle than Hagel did. The Vietnam War veteran was reportedly often the outsider who announced that he was stepping down from the position in November. Republican Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell backed Carter and called on him to have the courage to speak truth to power, not only to the Congress, but also to his commander-in-chief. Fierce fighting raged in East Ukraine between government troops and Russian-backed separatists again today as the warring sides attempted to bolster their positions ahead of a ceasefire deadline. Combat persisted in the first hours after the leaders of Russia, Ukraine, Germany, and France signed a peace deal in the Belarusian capital of Minsk yesterday. The most intense battles were for control of a railway hub of Debaltsev. European Union leaders expressed only very conditional support for the agreement, mindful that a September peace deal and ceasefire, also brokered in Minsk, broke down within days amid accusations that Moscow continued to boost the Ukrainian separatists. Even German Chancellor Angela Merkel, who joined French President François Hollande to broker the deal, had limited expectations, referring to it as a glimmer of hope, no more and no less. Joining me now here in the studio to discuss the latest political and diplomatic events is senior correspondent for Bloomberg Israel, Kalev Ben-David. Hi, Kalev. Thank you for coming in.
Pleasure to be here, Erin, as always.
All right, let's start with the controversy over the Prime Minister's address to the Joint House of Congress. Given the level of outcry and condemnation, is that address going to take place as scheduled, do you believe?
According to what I'm hearing, I mean, from people, certainly to the Prime Minister's comments and from people in his circle, yes, he is determined to go ahead and to give that speech. He feels it's a message he has to make it. He has to make it in that forum in Congress and publicly, because he's hoping, of course, that they'll impact maybe or help prevent this treaty being signed, or if being signed, at least prevent the lifting of sanctions.
Right.
And I do think that if he was going to cancel the speech, the window of opportunity he had where it would cause him the least political damage really would have been just in the first few days after it was announced. He could have said he wasn't fully aware, that the Obama administration hadn't been informed. He could have backed down probably to some degree then. I think at this point also politically, domestically, it would hurt him if he canceled. And so I'm sure I think he's determined to go ahead.
All right, so let's kind of talk about the day after. If he goes ahead and gives a speech, as everyone does expect at this stage, Will the state of Israel suffer damage, or is there some sort of benefit to Israel that you think will come of this speech?
It's interesting because this week I went to a campaign event and heard Michael Oren, his former diplomat, his ambassador to Washington, speak, and he raised the point that Israel has to start looking beyond that date, the March 23rd deadline for the treaty. If this called bad treaty is formed, he said Israel is going to need what he called a diplomatic Iron Dome to help it in terms of contending with the new reality of a nuclear Iran. I mean, Israel, again, all options on the table. We've heard this again this week. So Israel's going to need that connection with the U.S. And yes, you could argue this is souring relations with the Obama administration. Even people who are maybe supporting the prime minister on the principle of the issue of Iran, I've heard of acknowledged that, the way it's gone about has not been good. There's more attention being paid now to the fact who's going to be there than to the content of the speech, which was warning about Iran. So there is going to have to be some damage control with the White House that Netanyahu is going to do. He tries to do this already in different speeches, thanking him for Iron Dome and other things.
Right.
But yes, definitely is going to have to be some diplomatic effort from that new government, whatever it's going to be. Let's point out.
Well, what do you make of the White House response? Did the president overreact?
Listen, there's a judgment call here. You have to look at the background that there is this deep ideological disagreement between President Obama and Prime Minister Netanyahu. It is not a question of style, a question of style or personal differences. There is a hugely serious disagreement that they have about the nature of the Iranian threat and how to contain it. And of course, for President Obama, he wants to deal with this Iran issue. He sees it now as really a signature foreign policy initiative. So from his perspective, I would say he would say no. I do think, though, that President Obama, just like Prime Minister Netanyahu has some damage that he's going to have to control, I do think that President Obama also is going to have to do some damage control, certainly even with members of his own party. There are people there are strongly supportive of the Israeli stance on Iran, even if they're being a little quiet now because of the build-up to the speech. But yes, there is going to he is also perhaps I wouldn't say emotions, but looking more towards focusing more toward on the style than the substance of the issue.
How about here at home? Is this issue likely to have any kind of an impact on the national elections?
Well, in fact, we had a poll that was conducted this week in which I believe 69% of the respondents said it would not affect their vote. Maybe you could argue maybe a little bit, but no, because I think most of those people that are backing Prime Minister Netanyahu were well aware of the friction he already had with President Obama, was giving their support to Netanyahu. You could even make an argument that maybe on the Israeli right, he might even pick up a seat or two on it. I don't think it necessarily is going to have certainly not any kind of decisive impact on the election.
Okay, so now talking about the election and the campaigning, several local television channels, national ones, including Israel Television, have been very busy trying to organize a debate amongst the candidates, which doesn't happen here very often. Why is that, and do you think it's going to happen? Will they be successful in these efforts? Well,
we know that there is going to be a debate certainly, definitely, we're going to have to be a debate without the two leading candidates, Labor Party head Zionist camp head Isaac Herzog, as it's called now, and the Prime Minister, all the other candidates. In terms of a debate between Herzog and Netanyahu, at this stage, it's unlikely, but I would not rule it out. I think the Prime Minister, if he sees his polls show him slipping down beyond, say, I think at most we've seen a 3-seat lead to Labour. If coming towards the last few weeks of the election, he sees the Likud going down to maybe 4 or 5, he might be tempted to go ahead and try to debate Herzog, taking that gamble. And let's remember, he scored quite well in the debate with Shimon Peres in the 1996 election.
And that's like the last one, isn't it?
Well, that's true in the last one immediately before, but remember, he did have a confrontation with Itzhak Mordechai
that's right.
in the 1999 election.
Yes, he did.
And that went badly for him. And I think if you're asking me why Netanyahu has certainly had a speech, I think the memory of that debate with Mordechai, which he so surely regretted and definitely did help Ehud Barak, the Labour candidate who won in that election. That is still on his mind, and he's concerned about that. And as long as he thought he was the front runner, and even now with the way the general parties, the votes they're getting in terms of forming coalition, he's still the front runner. He's going to be reluctant to go ahead and have that debate. But we'll see. It's possible if he should go down in the polls.
Okay, one last quick question. We're almost out of time, and it's an economy-based one. But the price of oil, can we expect the prices to continue to fall? And how will this affect Israel's geopolitical situation?
You know, the price of oil, to me, this is in a way the biggest story of the year internationally. And it's not really just an economic issue. It's having huge geopolitical consequences. The question of it falling, it's hard to say because it's really the decision of one country. Saudi Arabia decided to bring down the price of oil. They claim, ostensibly, that it's to break the fracking industry in the U.S. that is providing real competition for it now. But many analysts believe that really there is an underlying political motivation, primarily directed against Iran. They wanted to damage Iran, maybe bring about some kind of concession from Iran on the nuclear issue. And one way to doing that is to bring the price of oil, damage the Israeli economy. A side effect, another good side effect for Saudi Arabia, damaging the Russian economy. Remember, Russia is a main backer with Iran of Syria's Bashar Assad, and the Saudis are very much against Assad. So that's causing issues, and maybe the Russian concessions now in Ukraine may be connected for it. No question about it. Price of oil the decline has been good for Israel because it's damaged Iran, it's damaged Russia, so maybe affecting Assad, and it's also good for the Israeli economy.
Well, that's good news for us, as you say. So, Khalid Ben David, always good to have you with us. Thanks for coming in this evening.
Pleasure as always, Aaron. Shabbat Shalom to you and all the viewers.
Thank you. The Regavim NGO released a report a week ago accusing the European Union of illegally funding unauthorized Palestinian building in areas under Israeli control as part of a strategic plan to create a de facto Palestinian state while avoiding the need to negotiate with Israel. Earlier, the director of Regavim's international desk, Ari Briggs, told me that the response from the Prime Minister was swift.
Well, we were very surprised at the immediate response to our expose. Half an hour after the expose went live, we'd been working on the expose for up to a year, finding out all the information about what the EU had been building illegally in Area C. And the response of the Prime Minister was to instruct the Defence Minister to actually look into these illegal structures and see where they could be demolished, that they should be demolished.
Is your organization satisfied with this response, or do you believe that it's going to be a delaying tactic of some kind?
We were happy with the response. The actions are still to come. These things never take a short amount of time to get done. But the importance was, one of the important parts was that he did respond. The next part will be to see the Defence Minister's moves.
Has your organization received a direct response from the Prime Minister's office?
No, we haven't received anything. We've sent him a thank you for responding to the expose, to the report, and hoping that things will be done to ensure the rule of law and the equal application of that law.
Explain to me where these structures are being built, in what areas, and why you find this to be illegal.
So just east of Jerusalem, you have the Adumim area, Malay Adumim, Kfar Adumim. In that area, including the E1 area, which is quite a sensitive area, these structures are built all around that area on the way, Road 1 going down to the Dead Sea. Most people pass it on the way down to the Dead Sea. On the right and the left, you'll see these 400 structures that have been built, and all of them are flagged with the EU flag.
Why is the EU carrying out this building? That's the question.
Yeah. Now, one thing I want to add about the building is we've also found, since the reports come out, buildings within Jerusalem. Just under the Hebrew University, we found another structure there with the EU flag on it. So, of course, we've reported on that one as well. Now, why would the EU be doing this? Well, they say it's humanitarian aid, but humanitarian aid should be worked through with the sovereign government, as is necessary with the Oslo Accords. So we believe, also by putting their flag and doing it so openly, they're saying we're giving diplomatic immunity to the Palestinian Authority's land grab of this land, which is so important to them and obviously so important to us.
Why would the Netanyahu government not take action before the expose that you aired?
That's a very good question. We're always trying to push the government to look after the state land. This land is critical to access so many different areas. Everyone who drives down to the Dead Sea sees it on both sides of the highway. It's dangerous. They're coming in and out of the highway. They're going into military zones, firing zones, and setting up homes there as well, all with the EU flag on it. So we don't know why the government's not enforcing the law when it should be enforcing the law, and that's why we're here to make sure it does.
What about the European Union itself? Have any officials contacted you? I know you mentioned that they are making claims of humanitarian aid, so can you elaborate on what their justification for the building is?
For sure. So at the same time as the expose went live here in Israel, we had, there were some MEPs, members of the European Parliament, who submitted a letter claiming that the EU was breaking three of their own parts of their own treaty in doing this here in Area C and in Jerusalem. And that has now been sent not only to the Foreign Affairs Committee of the European Parliament, but to the European Commission itself. And we've already got a response from the European Commission that they will hear this and give us an official response.
Tell me more about Regavim and what your motivations are.
For sure. Well, we're a research organization with a legal advocacy arm. So we research illegal use of state lands, and we then take that information and file petitions to try and get the government to protect state land. The reason we're doing it is because the state land makes up such a large chunk of land here in Israel that it's important that the government protect that for future development in an orderly fashion. So what we're interested in is the rule of law and the equal application of that law.
To basketball, and Maccabi Tel Aviv's 5-game winning streak in the EuroLeague came to an end as it lost at home in a lackluster performance to Alba Berlin 66-59 last night. With the defeat, Maccabi's record is now 5-2 as it fell out of first place in its final 16 group, 1 game behind Real Madrid. The loss also makes the road more difficult for Maccabi to ensure that it is one of the 4 teams in the 8-club group to advance to the quarterfinals. Despite Tel Aviv never having its A game on all night, it appeared that the club had enough to win the contest and led by a point at halftime. But Maccabi dug itself too much of a hole to climb out of in a disastrous third quarter in which it scored only 8 points and a comeback attempt fell short. Devin Smith led Maccabi with 17 points in a losing effort. In local finance, the shekel today put in a mixed performance in foreign currency trading. And due to the closure of the stock market on Fridays, here's a look at the closing numbers for the week. The IBA weather team tells us that tonight we're going to see occasional rain showers in this north and the center of the country, snowfall on Mount Hermon, and the risk of flooding along the coast. Tomorrow we can expect a slight rise in temperatures and a shift to isolated rain showers only in the north by evening. Here's the forecast at home and abroad over the next 24 hours. Thank you for being with us this afternoon. I'll be back tomorrow to bring you the latest breaking news from Israel. Hope to see you then. I'm Erin Viner, wishing you a great evening and Shabbat Shalom from Jerusalem.